Hey everybody, my name is Ramtram. I am a beta tester and a longtime player of Pumpkin Tower Defense. I help the devs test for bugs and provide feedback on how we can improve the game. And a common question that's come up a lot in our community is how to improve at the game. Maybe you've played 2, 4, 5, 12, 20 games, and you've seen some other players putting up high damage tests, doing some of the really difficult achievements. And so this is going to be a guide for sort of those beginner and or intermediate players with some insights from someone who, is a beta tester and someone who also competes on the leaderboards myself. Just a guide for you all. If you're not already part of the Discord, I strongly recommend that you join. The creators and the community are all super friendly and helpful, and the quality of the game just scales positively as we get more people involved. So let's go ahead and jump right in here. The different game modes, I'll assume you've already played a handful of games, but when you start the game, the opening screen is going to look like this. There are 4 different difficulties: easy, hard, extreme, and master. Each one of those, there's going to be 60 waves and then a damage test at the end. Each one of those, each one of the difficulties, it just scales. Like master's the hardest, easiest the easiest, obviously. But all of them are going to be necessary in order to do all of the achievements. Race mode is, I would say, kind of a more casual version of it. There are a handful of achievements involved in that one as well. Really good if you're playing with friends. It's competitive and fun. I think race mode is played a lot. And then the endless mode is actually the new mode that we released in the most recent patch, where after the 60 rounds, instead of it ending and you doing the damage test, it spawns infinite waves thereafter with a scaling divine shield mob that buffs the other mobs around it, and essentially it eventually becomes impossible and you can't handle it anymore. But it's a cool way to just sort of test how far you can get. There's also damage tests at the end of that as well. And then lastly, you can choose either to enable or disable gambling. Most games use gambling, and I think for the sake of this guide, most of this is going to assume that you are. Although there are contests that involve no gambling, there are achievements that involve no gambling, and we are going to talk a little bit later about sort of like, even if you're doing gambling, when to have the discipline to throttle wanting to just immediately start gambling. And also some people just prefer not having gambling, which is totally fine as well. So I'm going to go back into the game here. This is actually one of our beta test maps that I set up to use a couple examples and just kind of talk through some of the towers here. So one of the first questions that comes up all the time is, I guess scaling right off of that, is just, when should I start gambling? I would say that the short answer is that it really depends on the game. There isn't a single right answer, but my insights and recommendations on it. So I'm actually going to bring up the rewards. I had the patch notes. Yeah, keep them here. So this is actually in our Discord. If you go to the changelog channel, it'll show all of the patches changelogs, and there's a lot. Whenever a new patch comes out, I very strongly recommend, if you're enjoying this game, that you read that. We do make changes very frequently to towers. Some of the ones that were bad beforehand become good. Some of the ones that were overpowered become bad, or we're just trying to balance them, really. But this is the most recent information on gambling. If you choose not to gamble after, I think it's the 3rd boss, you get your first reward, which is either Chrono or a Urel. I would say my recommendation on this is to always take Chrono. Chrono is very strong, and if you choose to continue not gambling, he scales more and more, and he helps you stabilize a lot. There are reasons to take Urel here, but it's pretty rare. It's usually for achievements, or if you're trying to do a specific cheese on the here's the HOTS towers, the Heroes of the Storm towers, which is this tech line right here. But generally speaking, always Chrono. The Groomy tower is, I'm gonna bring that up again. I would say that the 2nd and the 3rd rewards are a little meh. The Groomy tower is good. It's like it's a free T7 tower later on. And then the random T4 is just, again, like, not that great. It's not something that I'll hold out for or whatever. I would say that the 4th reward here with the Ditto is very, very strong. He helps complete a lot of the key quests, which I'm going to get into here. But Ditto is not only is he a free T5 tower because you can copy any specific T5 tower that you want, but he can also give you like a specific tech line tower that you might need as well. The 5th, 6th, and 7, all of them have pretty high value. I would say that like my general strategy is that the most often time that I start gambling is right after Ditto. But in some of the records that I've set on the leaderboards, I've waited all the way till 7. I've had other times where I gamble right after Chrono. It really depends on how your game is going. Another recommendation is to save up gold before you start gambling. Don't start gambling with like 50 gold. You generally want to save up like 300 gold. Because if you just gamble and bust twice, and then you get to the end of that boss round and you don't even have a gold tower to come out of that, you're essentially just losing out on that reward that you could have gotten, as opposed to saving up a bunch of gold and then spamming gambling all at once at the end of a boss round. And so that way you can hope to hit like your Spectrum box, your gold box, stuff like that. Yeah, I would say like make sure, I think like 300 gold is a pretty good rough estimate start of where you would start. But yeah, I would say TLDR, Chrono's very strong, he scales, Ditto's very strong and key for a lot of the quests that we're about to get into. Don't wait too long, because if you're sitting on like, sometimes I've been sitting on like 900 gold before I start gambling. If you wait too long, you could be if you gambled earlier, you might be able to farm more gold out of that, but also don't rush into it if you're not stable yet. Second question that comes up a lot is when to build versus when to do construction research. The construction research, or CR, that's sort of your economy. It allows you to create higher value towers, whereas building keeps you alive. There are really only 4 openers in the game that are possible, and I mapped those out right here. I'm going to just refer to these as an 0 and 4, a 1 and 3, a 2 and 2, and a 3 and 1. What that means is that your opener, you have 120 gold. You can either do 0 construction research and just build 4 towers, which looks like this right here, where you'll just get 4 random T1 towers. And then for 1 and 3 is where you do CR once and then build 3. 2 and 2 is you CR twice and then build 2. And then the 3 and 1 is where you CR 3 times and then only build 1 tower. The 0 and 4, I would say, is the most consistent build, and there are a lot of tech towers that we're going to get into in the tower section that are key, like the Lava Spawn and the Archer right here are towers that I'm like very stoked to hit early on. And even if you hit basic towers, there is a basic tower quest here that you can sometimes just get lucky and hit early, and it's a free 100 gold or 6 lumber. So I would say that this is like a very consistent one for beginners, is just don't construction research at all and always just build 4. The 1 and 3 is also pretty consistent. It's very similar. You just kind of have this possibility of hitting a T2. So you can hit something like this here with 2 T1s and a T2, or multiple T2s, and that's just like a huge power spike that allows you to do construction research more aggressively. And then the 2 and 2, it kind of the same thing as the 1 and 3, where you're just kind of having this chance at hitting a tier 2, which can scale nice. I think any 2 tier 1 towers can clear on any difficulty except maybe master. So any 2 tier 1 towers is probably safe, which is why all 3 of these builds are viable. The 4th one of the 3 and 1, where you do 3 construction research and you only build 1, there are a handful of tier 1 towers that cannot clear. I think Lava Spawn is one of them, that cannot clear the first round on their own. So this one is very high risk. I would not recommend doing this in games with friends, because a lot of the time you're just gonna rip the run really early and not hit. But I will also say that doing this and hitting the T3 tower on your first build, there's actually I think one of the T3 towers can clear all the way through the first boss, the cannon tower here. That's a really strong opener for some of the more difficult achievements, so sometimes you'll be like fishing for that opener and resetting the game to try and hit that, because like I said, some of the achievements are just insanely difficult and require a very lucky opener like that to scale well. Not 1,000 or not 100% necessary, but it does help a lot. I would say for beginners, my tip here would be to weave construction research and building. So research once, build once, research once, build once. And I think as you start getting better at the game and realizing which towers are strong, or as you start feeling stronger, you can CR more aggressively, or if you just keep hitting tier 1s, you might be forced to build more than you would CR. Alright, so let's get into quests. So some of the key achievements and quests that you will need to do for both high damage tests and yeah, some of the achievements. I think I said that twice. I'm going to go into the ones that I recommend you keep an eye on in almost every single game, especially for high damage tests, but even for some of the quests that you have to, or sorry, the achievements that you have to do. These are the ones that are like very high priority to develop a good economy and just have a good game in general. The first one is Special Quest 5, which I'm going to hover over here so you can read it. This is to have one of each of the elemental towers in tier 1 through tier 5. This gives you the smoke box. The smoke box enables, I'll hover over that here. This gets enhanced by your spectrum box, and it also buffs the other towers and makes your gold boxes double. Is that correct? Applies debuff. Yeah, doubles research. I was having a brain fart there. I was like, wait, the Spectrum does that too. Yeah, so both Spectrum and this double the effects of like your gold box. So instead, when your gold box only hits for 1, it hits for 4. Smoke box is a very key piece that you will need in almost every single game. So that Special Quest 5 is very, very necessary to keep an eye on. If you hit it, any one of these elementals, you generally do not want to remove it from your board until you finish this quest. The second one is Special Quest 7, which is the Pokemon Tower here. Pokemon are just really strong right now. This is actually a relatively new addition. We're still scaling these, but we're planning on keeping the Pokemon very strong. You can only have one. Essentially, when you complete this quest, you get the Professor. The Professor gives you a Pokeball that allows you to choose a Charmander, a Bulbasaur, or a Squirtle. Those evolve into Blastoise, Venusaur, or Charizard, respectively. And yeah, they're just really strong, and it's a good way. It's a good way to stabilize your board if you can put this together. Special Quest 9 is the next one here for the Lumber Box. Just requires you to have one of each of the boxes. Again, you'll note that this does require the Smoke Box, which is why Special Quest 5 is very important. Lumber Box is just another very strong economy box that allows you to farm a ton of lumber. You can gamble with that lumber, get auras, or just get gold. Yeah. And then in terms of the other quests, I'm going to give a shout out to Basic Quest 3 here. If you construction research all the way up to 15, and then you just build a lot, you will eventually get your 10 tier 3 towers, which gives you a free icy elemental. Sometimes in games you get pretty unlucky and you just don't get any slow, so this is like a guaranteed way to make sure that you have slow on your board. You can slam the icy elemental down in the middle of your board. It feeds into your smoke box that you're trying to hit for the Special Quest 5, so it feeds into your smoke box. So it's just a good one to keep an eye on that usually you just get by building and keeping your T3s on the board until you hit 10 of them. Basic Quest 5 is just a massive power spike here. This is the next one. This requires you to have the Magic Tower and any other tier 5 tower. Pretty easy to execute. You just have to make sure that you hit the Magic Tower. I wouldn't recommend rerolling too aggressively because it's fine if you get this later, but getting the Ditto is very nice, which we already talked about a little bit earlier. The Ditto allows you to copy any tower, which is very strong for filling in key pieces, like even for your smoke box if you're missing Lord of Fire or whatever. Dittos allow you to just fill in that gap and get your smoke box earlier. And then obviously Winston, sometimes you just, maybe you already did your smoke box, but just getting a free T5 is just very, very strong. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know why the Winston is an option, because now with the new updated Ditto, you can just copy Winston, but maybe we'll fix that. Basic Quest 6 is the next one. There's only a couple more here. This just requires you to have 2 of any of these T6 towers, which are Ice, Don Quixote, Laser, or Lunch. Any 2 of those gives you a 350 gold power spike. I almost always take the 350 gold. I don't think Yagami is a very good tower. We did buff it recently, but 350 gold is just a lot of gold to pass up, and I like to degenerately gamble and scale my economy more than I like getting a reasonably powerful tower, so it's usually what I would recommend there. And then the last one is Extra Quest 2, this one here. which requires you to upgrade a Winston into a Fireston, which is a tier 8. If you click on Winston down here, you can see the requirements for that. It requires you to have 10 lumber and 10 gambling boxes to unlock that. But this gives you an additional spectrum box so that you can build a board like this. We'll actually get into economy in here in a second, but it allows you to get that second spectrum box to allow you to scale your economy even further. Cool. Let's keep going here. That is the quest. For the achievements, I'm not going to go too far into these, but you can go down here and look at the skins and stuff and hover over what the requirements are for you to do these. If you like any of these, you can just you can click through them and look at them and see what you need to do to get them. Some of them are pretty easy and you'll get just by playing the game enough. Other ones are insanely difficult and even veteran players are going to struggle with these. Yeah, these are super fun. I highly recommend them. Last few key tips before I get into towers here. I would say first and foremost that tech towers are generally stronger than basic towers, and they're also free to combine, whereas the basic towers cost 10 gold to combine with another tower. So when you're combining early game, highly recommend that you go down the tech lines versus combining basic towers. You generally want to use tech towers to eat basic towers. Downgrading is another key element that I think oftentimes gets overlooked. You can spend 50 gold to downgrade any tier 2 or tier 3 tower to a tier 1 tower, and it has a 2/3 chance to be a tech tower. Some of the tech lines we'll get into in a sec are very strong. Just don't forget that downgrading does exist. So if you're missing a key tier 1 tower, you can always downgrade to try and hit like an additional URL or something like that. It's a little expensive, but it's an option. And then lastly, on the Wisps, I wanted to add, so there are a handful of different colors of the Wisps. I'm just going to cover off since you're probably already relatively familiar with them, but the red one, you get one at the end of the boss round. The blue one is one of the quests up here where you get for having 5 red Wisps. I think it's basic quest 3. Yeah, here. And you can read up on all the yellow and green, etc. You might already be pretty familiar with these. My recommendation, never use your blue Wisp until the very end of the game. Like literally it should be your last action to use that and gamble with it. The blue Wisp is very clutch. You cannot obtain it again after you get your first one. So if you use it, you won't be able to combine it. Or you won't be able to use it to upgrade specific towers like your Raichus, your Lich Kings, your Gatling guns, your Exodias, things like that. You will need specific Wisps for the. Actually, this is red Wisps, but yeah, some of these require blue Wisps in order to upgrade them. Like this guy, is it Gatling? Yeah, Gatling is you need a blue and a black. Same thing with the black Wisps, never use it until the very end. Red and yellow Wisps, I would say keep a minimum of 5 and 5, but don't be afraid to use these early if you need to just stabilize. I actually use the first red one a lot just to make a tier 3 into a tier 4 to stabilize my board, so that way I don't have to build shitty towers and I can focus on construction research. And then the green and the white Wisps, I don't really have a recommendation for these, but you will need the white ones for late game damage tests to give yourself attack speed. Alright, let's get into towers here. There's not really like a best tower. These are all going to be useful. Some of them are better at AoE, some of them are better at single target, some are just dramatically stronger or weaker than others, some are filler, some slow, some stun, or do other CCs. But I'll cover off on the ones that I would keep an eye out for. First one is Lava Spawn, and honestly, any of the elementals, tier 1 through tier 5, we already talked about, but Lava Spawn, it has % health damage. I keep this on the board throughout the entire game. Archer is the other one that scales into, once it gets to tier 4, the Druid form, you can upgrade into Cat or Bear. You can only have one of these, and they require you'd have 3 red Wisps to use them, and some lumber. But both Cat and Bear are like insanely strong power spikes that you want to keep an eye on Archer. Archer tier 3 is also a very strong tower too. And then the other two, Gabumon, the two Digimon, Gabumon and Agumon, eventually combine into Omegamon, which combines into a tier 7 Omegamon, just a very strong tower that power spikes well. And then Urel has some applications for achievements, and there's like Dahaka is a very, Mecha Dahaka is a very strong tower as well. Tier 2, there's nothing here besides the elemental for the smoke box. Tier 3, Pikachu is very strong. It evolves into Raichu and then evolves into the Tier 6 version. This is currently the most efficient way to build late game towers. So Pikachu is always something to keep an eye on. It's also part of the quest for the Pokemon. And then obviously the elemental for your smoke box. Tier 4, the Fire Lord, is percent health. It's just a generally good tower to keep on your board, but it's also part of that smoke box line. And then Mewtwo is also part of the Pokemon quests and upgrades into Mew later on, which is one of the unique Tier 9 towers that, again, requires Wisps to have. So keep an eye on that. You generally don't have to keep a Mewtwo early on, but you will want to evolve into a Mew later on if you're doing a damage test. And then I'm going to give a special shout out to Inuyasha. If you invest into this ability or his added abilities, it's pretty strong for stabilizing your board. Just a good tier 4 tower. It's one of the more powerful towers for its tier. Tier 5, Saiyan Myers is pretty weak early on, but is very necessary for late game damage tests to bloodlust your most powerful towers. The Light Tower and Winston we already covered off on in the quest section, but these are two that I also keep an eye on as well. Tier 6, we already mentioned the quest, Ice, Don Quixote, Laser, and Lunch. All of the towers on Tier 6 are actually pretty bad, but getting that quest and power spiking for 350 gold is very good. Tier 7, I personally like Lionship, Salt, Saitama, and Lightning God are all just decent. Tier 7 towers are also not very strong, but they are quite a bit better than the Tier 6 for their level. So you can stabilize on those 4 towers. The rest are pretty meh. Like Alduin, is actually just not that great. He has a stun, but it's just not that great. And then lastly, Tier 8 and Tier 9. For Tier 8, you want to keep an eye on the Kimchi Stew. There are 2 Kimchi Stews, which is weird. This stun one actually isn't here right now. But when you make a Kimchi Stew, it has a chance to either have one of these 2 abilities, to either crit or to stun. For late game damage tests, which we'll get into in a second here, you will need a stun lock on the mobs, and this is one of the most effective ways to do it. The other one is Nerubian Tower. This now upgrades into a Tier 9 tower. That is also one of the strongest towers in the game for damage tests. I'm also going to give a shout out to Exodia. This is just a very strong, if you have the 5 red wisps to upgrade it, this is a really strong tower in general for its level, so you can stabilize on an Exodia as well, especially if you can upgrade it. And then going into Tier 9, as you get into Endless, the mobs get more and more evasion. Both Deathwing and Police Car have an AoE stun ability that cannot be evaded once it procs, so this can be really strong to try and get into as high as you can in Endless. They're not very good for damage tests, but they can help you with a stun lock, and they also are very good for trying to get to round 120 plus. Ragnaros, and honestly any of the unique towers that I've mentioned so far, like Mew or the Pokemon, etc., are all very strong. You can only have one Ragnaros. It's just insanely good. It's one of the best towers in the game. Definitely have at least one of those if you can. And then lastly, these towers actually kind of suck except for damage tests, but both Kyrestia and Avatar of Cain can be really strong if you can execute a good stun lock and have these attacking it the whole time and buffing it the whole time. Cool. Last couple sections here, last question actually that comes up a lot is how to get high damage test scores. And we've already covered off on a little bit, but first and foremost, you're going to need a very strong economy. That's going to require you to gamble a lot, and it's going to require you to have a setup that looks something like this, where you're maximizing the use of spectrum boxes. You could also do it down here if you wanted, but I usually do these 2 spots. The spectrum box turns ice boxes into stuns, which holds them in place for a little bit longer. It also buffs your gold boxes to give you far more gold, and your lumber box, smoke box, again, buffs your gold boxes to give you more gold and lumber. So it's a really good economy setup, where you also want to be careful. You don't want to be too strong, because if you kill the mobs too fast before they get all the way through the maze, you're just losing out on gold. So you need a really good economy, and you also weirdly need to not be too strong. You can be too good and fast at the game to the point where you're griefing yourself on not farming enough gold. So economy, that's pretty straightforward, I think. The other thing that I mentioned already was the stun lock. We mentioned the ice boxes, the kimchi stew. I would say that those are the most common ways to stun lock. There's a couple other stun towers in the game, but those are going to be uh, the best ways to do it right now. Um, the I would also be careful not to over gamble as when you realize that you're getting close to dying. You will need gold at the end to both build and also to re-roll for specific towers like Saiyan Myers or Kimchi Stew or stuff like that for your damage tests. A common mistake I see a lot of people do is they just keep gambling thinking that they're invincible, and then all of a sudden they lose the game and they're sitting there with 30 gold, and you just can't set up like a stun lock or anything that's going to generate you like a high damage test, or you're just missing out on a ton of damage there. So yeah, definitely like save some gold as you're getting close to the end of the game. And then lastly, some of the towers are really insane for the damage tests. I mentioned a couple of them, like Avatar is like very, very strong if you have a solid stun lock there. Ragnos is really strong, etc. And other ones are going to be better like sort of in the early to mid game, but then for a damage test are just absolute trash and you won't want it on your board. So but when you get to your damage test, you're going to be evolving those off of your board in favor of other towers. Uh, there's a lot to figure out and play. This game has a ton of depth. So again, I highly recommend you join up in the Discord if you haven't already. Experiment, practice, learn from your mistakes, try crazy stuff if you haven't done it before. But otherwise, just join up with the community, and I'll look forward to playing with you.